Friday, we got evidence that this year's unprecedented strikes by Walmart and fast food workers in cities across the nation are having an impact on the president himself.
There's some basic things that we can do just to create a better economic environment for these outstanding mayors. There are some areas, for example, raising the minimum wage that could have a tremendous boost in a lot of the cities where there are a lot of service workers who get up and do some of the critical work for all of us every single day, but oftentimes still find themselves just barely above poverty, or in some cases below poverty.
Now, in his most recent State of the Union address, President Obama called for raising the minimum wage to $9 an hour. But over the past year, folks like the men and women who clean the floors at Burger King and who stock the shelves at Walmart have taken to the streets calling for $12 to $15 an hour. And the voters of SeaTac Washington, SeaTac, home to the airport for Seattle and Tacoma and the 6,000 workers who labor there, the people of SeaTac passed a referendum last month to raise their minimum wage, the highest in the country, $15 an hour. Another 5 states this year raised their minimum wages, and last week Obama endorsed a proposal to raise the minimum wage nationwide. Federal minimum wage of $10.10 an hour, $1 more than what he was proposing just last year. Public opinion is on his side. A new NBC Wall Street Journal poll out this week found 63% of all Americans support raising the minimum wage to $10.10. That includes half of all Republicans. Even half of Tea Party members are in support of higher wages. While efforts to raise minimum wages seem to have momentum, workers face a tougher fight on another one of their demands: union representation. Today, we take it for granted that workers at McDonald's and Walmart and other places like that don't have a union, but it has not always been that way. You might have heard about the big wave of strikes throughout the 1930s that led to unionization throughout the auto industry. But retail clerks and waitresses and waiters, they were also winning union protection during that period. On February 27, 1937, 100 female clerks at a Woolworth's Five and Dime location in downtown Detroit staged a sit-in, and they were up against really tough odds. With cheap prices and more than 2,000 stores, Woolworth's was the retail empire of its time. You could call it the Walmart of the early 20th century. But the salesgirls soon won better wages and union representation, not only for themselves, but for all 40 Woolworth stores across the city. By the beginning of the next decade, when the U.S. entered the Second World War, the labor movement had become so strong that strikes like the one at Woolworth's were an everyday occurrence. But the president at the time, Franklin Roosevelt, knew that work stoppages could threaten the nation's capacity to manufacture all the uniforms and goods and weapons they would need to win the war. So he stepped up labor laws. He limited workers' ability to strike and forced business to settle their labor disputes amicably. For the most part, it worked. Business and labor worked things out for the sake of the war effort. But there was one CEO who would not play ball. His name was Sewell Avery, a staunch conservative who hated not only unions, but also FDR's entire New Deal. Sewell Avery ran the company called Montgomery Ward, a retail giant. It was kind of the Amazon of its day. If you lived in the middle of nowhere and needed to buy something, Montgomery Ward would ship it to you from their mammoth catalog. And in towns and cities like on Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago, Montgomery Ward had stores. So when Sewell Avery refused to recognize his workers' union, it was a really big deal. These days, when businesses tell unions to take a hike, well, that seems to be business as usual. But not then. The full force of the U.S. government came down on Sewell Avery. Roosevelt sent in the National Guard, whose soldiers carried Avery out of his office in downtown Chicago in October 1944. The federal government's message to CEOs across the country was clear: negotiate with your unions or else. After the war, Sewell Avery would exact revenge. He teamed up with the National Association of Manufacturers and with Republicans in Congress to roll back the union movement. And in 1947, they succeeded big time. Over the veto of President Truman, Republicans pushed through the Taft-Hartley Act, a comprehensive bill that cut a broad range of union activity off at the knees. This was the beginning of a long unraveling of federal labor law that weakened service sector unions in particular. And as big box stores and malls spread out across the suburbs, organizing workers became even harder. Fast forward to today, and just 1 in 20 retail workers is represented by a union. The laws protecting workers' rights are so rarely enforced that more and more we're seeing workers taking to the streets, trying to win support from the public, from community leaders, from lawmakers, from anyone they can, as they try to win back some of the power and the protections that they once had. I want to bring into this conversation Josh Barrow, politics editor for Business Insider, Sadeh Gebrselassie, a staff attorney at the National Employment Law Project, Teresa Teresa, labor economist at the Schwartz Center for Economic Policy Analysis at the New School, and Richard Wilson, an employee who's been working at a Walmart in Chicago for over 2 years. He's also a member of Our Walmart, an organization that supports workers there. And I should point out that I've been talking with and working with some of the folks at Richard's organization, Our Walmart. Thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. You braved the snow to be part of this conversation. It means a lot to me. And Teresa, I wanted to start with you with kind of some of the history, picking up on what we were just saying about the way that unions used to be so strong in this country and really have a voice and be able to protect workers. And as they've declined, we have seen wages fall. You know, how important is the decline of unions to the story of low wages?
Well, as a labor economist, I know that wage contours, wage levels are set in the economy. They're also set in politics and the law and legislation. So the lack of protection for unions is instrumental in making the United States #1. And sometimes it's not good to be #1. We are #1 in the world in creating low-wage jobs. 1 out of 4 workers in the United States is a low-wage worker, meaning that they make 45% of the median wage, which is now $18,000 per year. So a quarter of our workers make $18,000 per year, and no other industrialized country has that kind of record.
Wow.
Greece, that is a mess, as we know, only 12% of their jobs are low-wage jobs. Some of the richest, fastest growing, innovative countries like Norway is at 5%. So we've created an environment where low-wage jobs is the business model.
Right. Well, and Teresa, one of the things that I always look at is this graph that shows the way that productivity goes up.
Yep.
And it used to be, as productivity went up, wages went up right along with it.
Right.
And somewhere in the 70s, that became unhinged. And also in the 70s is when we really started to see a decline in unionization. So to me, it seems very closely intertwined.
It is, actually. We all know this. Also, the big expansion of low-wage jobs in China. So the unfettered, trade with China has actually, this import penetration has caused these low wages too. But we went right along with it, and a lot of Chinese employers are really just part of American companies. So it's not really Chinese workers, it's American workers using those global supply chains.
That's such a great distinction. Once today, like we were just talking about, since workers face such barriers to unionizing, we are seeing movements like Our Walmart that Richard is involved with, taking to the streets and trying to figure out, with labor laws as they are, how they can still have a voice. And I know you work with a lot of these types of organizations. What sort of models have been effective in providing workers with a voice in the absence of a union?
I mean, we've seen union density decline from 35% in the 1950s, at the time of that amazing history lesson that you just gave, to less than 7% today. And so we've had to figure out, workers have had to figure out a way to organize. And it's important to know that you don't have to be in a union to be able to organize and, protest unfair labor conditions. You are protected. The problem is that there's a big gulf between, the theoretical right to organize and what happens when you actually do it in practice. Because as I'm sure Richard will tell us, there are severe consequences for workers, especially in this economic climate, when they stand up and protest unfair labor conditions. And so the way that our Walmart and the fast food workers have been doing it over the last year, and these are growth industries in our economy, as Teresa was saying, these are the jobs that are growing, but these are the jobs that are paying literally single-digit hourly wages. They've been doing it, through a combination of just, raising the profile of low-wage work. Who are low-wage workers? They are adults. They are not teens. They are supporting families. They are, working 2 jobs to get by. In fact, McDonald's is telling them to work 2 jobs to get by. They are being forced to rely on public assistance to make ends meet.
Right.
And so I think they have elevated this national conversation about low-wage work and gotten President Obama to even, say income inequality is a huge deal in this country.
Yeah, I think, Richard, that you and people like you have focused the conversation in this country, and I just have to say, personally, how much I respect you and your courage, because you're out there thinking not just about yourself, but you're thinking about workers across the country, and you're risking your own livelihood to do so. Talk a little bit about what brought you to that point where you decided, you know what, I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm going to go on strike. I'm going to engage in protests. I'm going to lift my voice to do whatever I can, both to better my situation, but also the situation of workers across the country. What got you to that point?
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here this morning. But my story is unique, but it's the same as workers are around the whole world, around the whole U.S. We just decided that we want to have a better life. That the age of low-wage workers is over. It's a thing of the past, and you can't survive in this economy making $8.25, $9.25, just things of that nature. You just can't survive. And so my personal story is I did the right things. I went to college. I got my degree. But
Liberty in Virginia, close to where I went to school.
Yeah, Liberty University in Virginia. So I did the right things, only to find out, because I owe my school like $3,000, I can't physically get my degree, so I'm physically have to be at Walmart. And
so you have all the credits you need.
Yes.
But because you can't pay the fees you need to graduate.
Yes.
You are unable to get your degree.
Exactly. And so because of that, and because of things of that nature, I have to be at Walmart. And so like now I'm a low-wage worker. And so I know at Mars store in Lakeview, it's not the same. It's the same all over the whole country that we're workers. I'm one of many who are in my store who are actually sick and tired of the way that home office is treating the associates, cutting hours, making them work overtime, not getting paid unless it's company approved, and take extended lunches and things of that nature.
Right.
Just unfair practices.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard reports that of what you would call wage theft, where people are pressured to work overtime off the clock, right? And basically the message is, if you don't like your job here, if you're not willing to do those sorts of things, take a hike, because we've got 1,000 other workers behind you ready to take that low-wage job. We're going to pick up on that point and get Josh Barrow in this conversation as well right after this.